Welcome to Collab Conversations, the podcast where impactful discussions serve as catalysts for change. I'm your host, Sabrina Hanna, and this podcast is dedicated to advocacy and the individuals driving positive transformation in the Canadian healthcare landscape. And in today's episode, I've got three amazing guests with me. I've got Robbie Spring, Gordon Levine, and Yuan Liu. And we're going to talk about precision medicine. We're going to talk about the different advocacy work that all three of them are involved with. And I'm just going to ask you each to briefly introduce yourselves, and then we'll get started in the discussion, which I'm super excited about. And Robbie, if you want to go first, you're the first person I see on my screen.
Okay. I'm Robbie Spring. I am both an advocate and now a consultant, I guess. I've worked in the health and life sciences for over 15 years. I have an undergrad in medical biophysics, a master's in neuroscience, another master's in translational research, where I studied health innovation adoption and have worked across research, academia, government, and industry. And then a year and a half ago, I found myself as a breast cancer patient, and that completely reshaped my life. And that's why you find me here today.
So happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want to go next?
Hello, my name is Yuan Liu. I was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in September 2022. I have a background in science and business with a master's in business administration and a master's in immunology. I pivoted into project management as my last job before my cancer diagnosis. But prior to that, I spent my time in academic research in the intersection of science and business, and also spent a little bit of time in industry. Since my diagnosis, I have spent a lot more time in patient advocacy, and I feel like I need to put my voice to the many that have not had voices because they're too sick or they're no longer with us anymore. So I feel an obligation to them to honor them.
Thank you for being here, Yuan. And Gordon.
Hi, I'm Gordon Levine. I practiced commercial law for 25 years. In 2014, I was diagnosed with colon cancer, which began a 7-year odyssey. It ultimately metastasized and spread throughout my body. I went through many surgeries, many lines of different chemotherapies. I did a clinical trial, and then ultimately I did some combination immunotherapy, kind of on an experimental basis. And at this point, I am currently no evidence of disease, which is an amazing result from stage 4 metastatic cancer. So I pivoted um, my career, quote unquote. I don't have fancy master's degrees, although I consider that my experience is like a master's in cancer, um, uh, because of all of the science I had to learn along the way. And now I focus on patient advocacy, especially in the Canadian context, to try to help patients get to treatments that will be beneficial. So I'm very happy to participate with everyone today.
We're happy to have you here also, Gordon. I think what's really interesting about the three of you is how your experience has brought you to this place where you're doing this great advocacy work. And so maybe all three of you can speak to how your experience inspired you to step into this world of advocacy. And Gordon, I see you, so why don't we start with you?
Sure, because for me, when I was diagnosed 10 years ago, patient advocacy wasn't really a thing that we heard about. And in fact, precision medicine wasn't a thing that was really discussed, because we were in the early days, I think, of biomarker testing and sequencing. So my experience began as many other cancer patients. You are diagnosed, you're in shock, you don't know what to do, and the doctor tells you you need this surgery and you need this chemo, and you just do it. And you hope that you're in the group that treatment will work and you'll get on with your life, and this will be, a horrible year, but you'll move forward. And then when I had a recurrence, and it had spread to my abdomen, and I was now stage 4, that was the first time I started to think about what are my options. Do I need second opinions? Is the treatment that is proposed relevant for me? In my case, I reached out to Colorectal Cancer Canada, which does amazing things. And even in those days, they were quite small. They've grown to be a much larger organization since then. And ultimately, I also would speak to other cancer patients who had been through similar experiences to help guide me through my own process. I think I probably speak for everyone here, but I think advocacy usually starts with self-advocacy, learning how to advocate for yourself, get asking hard questions, maybe getting second opinions. For me, the big turning point happened in 2018. I was very, very sick, probably close to a terminal stage, with spread in my organs, in my bones, and getting worse and worse, and running out of treatment that was available locally. So I went and got a second opinion. Um, for myself, I ended up having to go to the US for treatment because the immunotherapy was not available locally. When I began my treatment, and then miraculously started to get better. My tumors started to shrink. My oncologist got me in touch with an organization called Cancer Research Institute. They're out of New York. They're the oldest immunotherapy funding organization, founded 70 years ago. And so for probably 50 to 60 years, they were researching, and then all of a sudden they had some survivors. And I joined the group of, they call them immunoadvocates, and met um, incredible pioneers. The woman who went to Sweden when Jim Allison won the Nobel Prize for Yervoy. She was his first human patient with melanoma, and she's still alive, must be about 15, at least 15 years later now. Amazing, amazing pioneers. And I was very inspired just to start having conversations with this group of people and learning about how they were reaching out into the communities and trying to find ways to support each other, but also to uh, get awareness out there for patients. So that was kind of how I got into advocacy, and since then I've done a lot of work with Colorectal Cancer Canada, and of course all the time getting phone calls and emails from other patients, with questions, trying to guide them to really to have the tools for them to help themselves through this very complicated and scary process, which is cancer.
Yeah. And I will ask the three of you afterwards more precisely about some of the advocacy work that you're doing, because Gordon, I know you talked about it now that you're involved with the immuno advocates with the National Cancer Institute out of New York, and that sounds super interesting. But I'm going to go to Yuan and talk to us a little bit about how your experience got you into advocacy.
Gordon is correct. We need to start with self-advocacy. When I was first thrown into this diagnosis, and there was a lot of ambiguity in the very beginning, the beginning days, the beginning weeks, and there was no control there. I was just trying to survive, showing up for the next appointment, showing up for the next piece of information I was trying to get, trying to understand what was going on, trying to Google. And I just had to take a step back and remember what all my mentors have said to me throughout my career was focus on what you can control. And getting information was how I was trying to control what's uncontrollable in my life at that point. The time between getting a diagnosis or potentially getting a diagnosis that you might have cancer and here's what you need to do and your treatment plan, that is the limbo world that is really hard. We talk about scanxiety and how patients getting anxious every time they get up to their regular scans, but the time before your treatment plan is also very difficult because you don't know what's going on. You don't know your prognosis. You don't know what you can do about it. And in that moment, I was just focusing on myself. I was focusing on advocating for myself. But as I got my treatment started and as I got better, I started looking around me. I got involved in Facebook groups on forums and I got to know people and understand what they're going through, understand our shared challenges and our commiserating on everything. And I started thinking, I have all this experience. What am I going to do with it? So I started evolving, and it's just like my career. I evolved. I started out with a master's in immunology, working in a lab as a manager, to being a project manager in a biotechnology company. It was just an evolution for me to become an advocate. Here is something that I can add back to the community. I have a science background. I know sort of the biology of this. I can perhaps talk science, but in a more equitable, more reachable, approachable way for people and help them understand and gain control when there's so much ambiguity. About that time too, I started volunteering more and more. And it seems like in my first year, I was just moving around forums and getting to know people and networking with a lot of other advocates online. And then it just started evolving where opportunities would be coming my way. And I just started volunteering more and more. And here I am today. I think we're going to get into a little bit detail more about what I'm working on. So I'll leave the details to later.
Yeah. So I just have a question for you because you said you just trying to survive. And so how do you go from just trying to survive to what you're doing now, which is phenomenal?
Again, focus on what I can control. For example, exercise. We know how important it is to stay healthy because having a baseline good health is important for you to tolerate whatever the future is going to give me, stronger medicines with worse side effects. So that is something that I evolve my thinking into is to be able to focus on the things that I can control. I bring in a notebook to my appointments. I ask questions, and I've always been outspoken, so I'm still outspoken. That helps.
Yeah. You have a great voice to bring to the conversation too. So, Robbie, do you think that your professional experience helped you step into this advocacy world?
It felt just like so natural. Because I started right away. So my path, and I didn't mention this up front, my mom had breast cancer 5 years ago. Um, it was scary at first, but then it actually wasn't that big of a deal. She was older. She had been on estrogen for a long time. It made sense. And she ended up only needing a lumpectomy and radiation and didn't have any of the known genetics. So we kind of moved on from it. And then my sister had a benign lump after she finished breastfeeding, and she begged to get into short-term high-risk screening, given that our mom had just had breast cancer. So they said, okay, we'll put you in short-term high-risk screening, but only for 3 years. Or she begged for high-risk screening. They said, we'll do it in the short term. We'll do it for 3 years. We'll give you a mammogram and an MRI. And if at the end of the 3 years nothing's found, you're out of the program. So in the third and final year, this was like January of 2023, she has her mammogram. It's completely clear. 1 month later, she has her MRI, and she has 3 tumors, one of which is 3 centimeters. And that's like 12 months after, or approximately 12 months after she had her last MRI. So we were obviously really shocked, found out that it was breast cancer. And they were still telling my sister at this point, oh, it's early, it's not aggressive. If you want a mastectomy, you can have it, but it's not going to change your outcomes, and you're going to have to wait a lot longer. So she opted for a lumpectomy. And after the lumpectomy, found out that actually the cancer had spread to her lymph nodes and she was stage 2. At that point, I was waiting to get in to speak to a genetic counselor. We didn't have any of the known genes, but that's the first point of entry into screening, especially at someone, I was 35 at the time. So for a younger person, you don't get mammograms and screened automatically. And so when we found out hers had spread, I didn't want to wait, because waiting meant speaking to a genetic counselor and then them deciding whether I was eligible to get screening and then getting referred into like mammogram, ultrasound, whatever it is. And so I asked my family doctor, will you refer me in to like get a mammogram and ultrasound? She said, no problem. I went in, this was May 2023, and I had cancer too. Didn't feel anything. Both of us didn't feel anything. Both of us had clear mammograms, and both of us only found our cancers on ultrasound or MRI. And in fact, like the ultrasound didn't show the extent to like what I had other spots there. I was lucky. I was only stage 1. I didn't have lymph node involvement, but because of precision oncology tools, we found out that the cancer was higher risk, and that's why I ultimately needed chemo. So my positive biopsy results came back on like May 26th of 2023, and my first line of treatment was surgery. I had to wait 11 weeks between finding out I had cancer to getting that treated and being told in that time, in that process, don't worry, it's not aggressive. But I was watching my sister go through chemotherapy, knowing that hers had how much it went from nothing to something in 12 months, and like knowing that it had spread to her lymph nodes. And so during that time, I wasn't working, and I thought, like, I have this health and life science background. I have experience in like public affairs and government relations, and I just wanted to help. I wanted to be able to like help these organizations, and I knew I wanted to get involved. And so I reached out to Rethink Breast Cancer, made that connection there. Didn't do anything at that point, but I knew that I was going to be an advocate right away. I knew I wanted to be in the policymakers' offices advocating for better screening for women and better care, because the amount of pushing that it took just to get that surgery at 11 weeks for me is insane, because it would have been longer for someone else if they weren't sitting in those appointments and knowing the timelines and knowing to put pressure. And I am a vocal person. Not everyone is that way. And somebody else would take the word of the physician or who saying like, don't worry, it's not aggressive, we have time. Like, it's actually not okay. And it's not their fault. Like, they're working in a broken system. Like, they are backlogged with surgery. So it's not like they're twiddling their thumbs, but at the same time, you need to push for yourself. And I am someone who has the privilege of knowing the system, but I have the knowledge and the expertise and the connections to navigate it. And it was still really hard. It was still not easy. And my thought is like, oh my God, what about everybody else? What about people who don't know that they need to do this, who don't know that they actually have to push in order to get seen? Because we work in a system that isn't preventive. It's actually like very reactive. And so you need to be really sick in order to get that immediate quick care. Like, that's the bottom line. And so that is why I decided to be an advocate. And after I had my surgeries, I ended up needing chemotherapy, and I got involved with a couple initiatives while I was in chemo, and then continued that now after the fact. And so I am involved with Creative Destruction Labs and working with them to try to build out a patient contribution group And we're piloting that this year to see if patients can provide value in early stage innovation. I believe that we can. I'm also an advocate with Canadian Cancer Society and had the privilege of being able to meet with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health. And I continue getting involved in doing those types of things and going to patient conferences and meeting with policymakers to make sure that others get better cancer care and other women have access to better screening tools.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think one of the things as advocates is like we want to tell the story because you can throw out a whole bunch of numbers and stats, but unless you're telling that story face to face, that makes such a big difference. Do you want to talk about those experiences when you've been in the Prime Minister's office and in the Minister of Health's office, and what are the outcomes?
They will remember the story. And it's interesting having sat on different sides of these government policy meetings in the past. And so going in and being the person telling your story, it is a different type of conversation and it humanizes the issue. It puts something, it's not just a piece of paper or legislation that needs to be passed. It's not a company putting pressure on. It's like you are a person who actually like needed better care and needed their government to step up and the proper measures weren't in place. So it gives that context that's really, really important. And the value of advocating for better care for others, it's actually invaluable because they're going to remember that story when they walk away. Like I had a meeting with another policymaker and I walk in and we talk about breast cancer and they're crying because they've been affected by it too. And that story is what gets someone and motivates them to actually take action. So that was an interesting perspective for sure. I felt like there's a task force right now at the federal government talking about whether women between 40 and 50 should get screened for breast cancer, and they came out with some really like damaging recommendations based on old data. And it's really confusing for Canadians because at the provincial level, a lot of provinces are actually like implementing the correct measures following the US and the FDA's recommendations that women between 40 and 50 should get screened. So this task force came out with these like recommendations about a month after we had our Minister of Health meeting, and he stepped up and took the right action. And I felt like myself and the other advocate who met with him were really heard. And that was the first time where I'm like, okay, like we're going in, we're using our voice. And while the changes haven't been necessarily made at the federal level, like I felt like we were heard and I felt like he was taking the right measures. And that was really, really interesting and felt, even though it wasn't the outcome, it felt rewarding of like, okay, I need to keep doing this.
Yeah. Well, they heard you, which is
Yes.
really important because they were not always heard. And so, I mean, you talked about the task force, and I think I know that what we're seeing is a lot of early onset cancer. And I think the three of you are perfect examples of this early onset cancer. And we'll talk about it afterwards. But I wanted you to talk a little bit about the advocacy work you're doing, and then Gordon, get into the advocacy work that you're doing.
Well, I did want to follow up on what Robbie was just saying, because the problem with colorectal cancer is it's always been kind of hidden away. And because people are uncomfortable talking about your digestive system and pooping and all of this stuff. But colorectal cancer is the second most deadly cancer amongst men and the third amongst women. And it's rising and it's hitting younger and younger people. And what we're seeing in the system is a lot of the advocacy has, for example, in Quebec, resulted in a bit more access to they call it the FIT test, which is, I call it the poop test. Whereas in the US, the protocol is colonoscopy at 45, and they're probably even going to lower that. Uh, the issue becomes, let's say you do that test, you need, if you have a positive, you need a colonoscopy to confirm it because sometimes it's a false positive. The lag between that test result and your colonoscopy can be the difference between a stage 1 to a stage 2 or a stage 3 to a stage 4. And then also, like Robbie had mentioned, now you have your diagnosis. How long is it to get the surgery that you need? So we have like these kind of mountains that we need to climb, and we're making a little bit of progress there, but um, uh, we really have to bring into focus kind of these shortcomings within our medical system, and find a way to, you know, improve the screening and decrease the delays to get proper diagnoses before the system ends up spending millions and millions of dollars on treating stage 4 patients, where we could have maybe especially in case of colorectal, it's entirely curable and preventable if it's caught early. So I think like this, and maybe we need to collaborate even amongst different cancer groups together, because I think a lot of our issues are similar issues related to access to diagnosis, access to surgery, access to treatment. So I just wanted to you know, kind of jump on that point.
Yeah, and so just a question for you on that point. So you were talking about how you have to get a fit test before you could get a colonoscopy, and with the elimination of the fit test, I mean, I understand it's like a different healthcare team that would do this versus the team that does the colonoscopy. But if we went straight to the colonoscopy, then we would eliminate that maybe unnecessary procedure, eliminate those extra costs, eliminate that delay.
Yeah, but I think it's economics also. So I don't have an issue with people are afraid of colonoscopies. They're not fun. The prep is not fun. The procedure is not fun. Um, so if there's a way to get more people screened sooner in a cost-effective way, I think that's great. The problem is the next step, because uh, if you have a positive, you need to have a colonoscopy, and you need to have it literally the next day. And if it's going to take 6 months or 8 months to get that colonoscopy, that could be the difference between life and death, or extreme advanced cancer with or a lower stage cancer. So I don't have a problem with the idea of the fit test. Um, the problem still ends up in the same place, which is not enough access and not quick enough access to the colonoscopy. And then, of course, you know, the same thing that Robbie had mentioned. Now you have a diagnosis, you got to get to a surgeon. Now the surgeon has to get you booked into the system that's backlogged, and with COVID, even more backlogged to get the surgery. So, like, each step of the way, I think, is really crucial. But that initial kind of easier screening, that I don't think that's the problem. I think that could be a good component in a proper early diagnosis system, but you need the rest of it to also work for it to make sense.
Yeah. And just on the topic of screening, Yuan, you and I spoke about screening when we did our video for Precision Medicine Awareness Month. And you were talking about how like the cessation work that they're doing in tobacco is great, but anybody who's got a lung is at risk for lung cancer. And you were talking about the need for change in the screening policies. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I think I echo what Gordon is saying, is that there is a structural infrastructure challenges in how we screen for lung cancer right now, and it's low dose CT. And CT instruments are not accessible in many regions of the country, for example. So it's one thing to say, yes, let's expand the screening criteria to more people, but is it actually going to be more accessible? I don't know. And what are we going to do with the ones where it looks like there's something that we need to further investigate, where is the system for us to actually figure out how to get to the diagnosis? And I think those are all things we need to catch up on, and we have a lot of deficiencies in that. I firmly believe in innovation, that we need to get to other types of technologies for screening. We don't have a fit test equivalent for lung cancer, so maybe it's through metabolomics from breathalyzer type of test, or through blood test. There's different avenues that different companies and different scientists are working on. So I think for us, we can start getting proof points that lung cancer risk is increasing, especially in younger folks, in younger women, and in never smokers. And we need to keep collecting those points, and we need to continue to innovate. Perhaps somewhere in there, we would start talking about screening outside of sort of a very extensive smoking history type of criteria. But we're not there, and I don't think the system is there to be able to capture and expand eligibility. So we just have to keep talking. One thing that we don't talk a lot about, and Gordon also talk about in colorectal cancer, is support and funding is inversely correlated with survivorship. So, you know, if you die faster, you're going to stop talking about your cancer, right? And I think you find that with different diseases and different cancers. And again, we come back to, you know, if I'm healthy enough to talk about this, then I'm going to talk about it, because there are many others who've, you know, we've lost along the way that haven't talked about it.
I think that's a huge point you just made. We're the witnesses, and it's our, and I think we all would agree, it's our, we feel the obligation to spread awareness because we're lucky. We're alive, and you know, we're still going scan to scan, but it's I realized that after surviving, uh, to go litigate another case in court, lots of people can do that, but there's not that many survivors, especially in stage 4 colorectal cancer. There's not a lot of us around. It's really, we really need to be out there, spreading the word. I agree 100%.
And the same is true for stage 4 lung cancer.
We lose many. And the hardest thing about having cancer is that you make friends fast and then you lose them.
Yes. It's a hard thing about advocacy. I don't know what your experiences are. It's very, very challenging, especially when a lot of the patients that reach out to me, they're already quite sick, and you lose a lot of these people, and you become close because you're sharing very intimate uh, conversations about life and death and treatment and everything else. And you're talking at extremely vulnerable times in people's lives. It's I find it a difficult thing, and that's why I find that these kind of fellow advocacy conversations are really helpful for me. Just almost as support for myself. I don't know how both of you feel about your experiences.
I know that wasn't a question for me,
Oh,
so I'm going to let one of the two of you answer.
I mean, because mine was caught earlier, it's a little bit different. But the only reason I'm alive is because my sister had it, because it would have been too late. And the only reason my sister is because our mom had it. And we're really lucky, but I have connected into communities where other people are living with metastatic breast cancer, and it's scary. And again, also younger and younger women not having access to the appropriate screening measures in time. And these conversations are helpful, and it's also like reinforces that we're doing the right thing, and we're committed to similar causes and sharing that together and keeping each other going.
Did you want to add in anything?
There is guilt. I've had my cathartic moments where it's like, what happened here? What did I, what's different here? Again, try to think the positives and try to think about what I can spend that time doing instead of the why me's.
And so
This
I agree
the
with
survivor
that
the
too.
survivor
It's like,
group, yeah, this survivor guilt is a huge thing that nobody talks about except when advocates get together. And I think it's a huge motivator too. Why did I survive and all these other people didn't? And what can I do about it? The only thing I can do is try to use whatever talents I have to try to help somebody else survive or make some kind of a change that will lead to someone else surviving. It's a big thing that I don't I don't hear anyone discussing other than in these kind of conversations. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
it's interesting because like I won't even let myself get to like the guilt place. It's like, yeah, or even be called a survivor because mine was caught so early. So I don't feel like, sure, it was like horrible, but like treatment and that period of time, but compared to what other people go through, it doesn't feel like I should be called a survivor. Like I was sick, now I'm better, and I want to help other people. And so maybe that's my version of guilt. I don't know. But yesterday, even someone was like, she's a cancer survivor. I was like, I'm a thriver. I'm not a survivor. I don't feel like it's appropriate for me. I don't feel like that.
It's a huge discussion as well, the terminology.
Yeah.
You know, so people will say, well, every day anybody wakes up alive, you're all survivors, right? And then there's all the warriors and battlers, and then it's like, well, but that doesn't capture things properly either. I had many issues with using the word survivor for myself because I felt so vulnerable that I never wanted to even say survivor because I was never confident that I was going to make it. So it's probably a topic for another time and place, but the language is something that I talk about with people quite a bit.
I'm with you on that. It's a hard, I feel like there's so many landmines with the language and the terminology. And it's different. The ultimate truth is that like it's different for everyone. So we have to accept that like we're gonna say the wrong thing and use the wrong word, and then we're gonna learn a preference, just like we all have different preferences of what to be called.
But
There
you
is,
also all have your own experience, and then you could be whatever you want in that experience because it's your own.
yeah. I was going to bring up, it's not an initiative that I'm very familiar with, but I heard about it, that the International Association for the Study of Lung Cancer, with patient groups in that organization, they have come up with a lexicon. So for example, you don't say smokers and never smokers or non-smokers, it's people with smoking histories, people without smoking histories. And I think that is something that is really important for us. It's like we should start building a lexicon. I think we all have individual preferences. Like some people don't mind being called warriors or fighters or have battles, but others don't. And let's start talking about the language.
Yeah. I used to go to a conference called The War on Cancer, and I like always felt it super offensive that they would call it the War on Cancer. They have since changed the name of the conference. It's no longer called that. But I agree. I think when I especially am working on things and I don't say your tumor because you didn't ask for that tumor and it's a tumor and it just happens to be in your body. Um, but was there, I feel like I interrupted somebody. Did I interrupt somebody?
No.
No. Okay. So, I mean, I love this conversation. We could keep having it. I did want to ask, like, Yuan and Gordon, you haven't told us about what you're working on specifically, but we could do that and then we can continue having this conversation on the terminology if that's what you wanted to do.
I can talk a little bit about the work that I'm doing. I spend time with the Terry Fox Research Institute's initiative called Marathon of Hope. And we are a group of patients that have come together, and we call ourselves a PWG, a patient working group. And we are embedded into different working groups inside the Marathon of Hope initiative. And we support different projects in there, everything from developing informed consent templates to helping them with the renewal process right now, to speaking up and developing a website for patients. And now we have a patient hub where we tell our stories. The second initiative that I am involved in is with the Canadian Immune Compromised Advocacy Network. And it's not cancer specific, it's more on how do we, as people who may have compromised immune systems, navigate the pandemic. And CN in this case is talking about putting together a comprehensive COVID-19 toolkit for people with compromised immunities. And the advocacy work goes around immunizations for vaccines, for example, and passive immunizations such as monoclonal antibodies, antivirals to support post exposures, and also non-pharmaceutical interventions such as masking. The third thing that I've just finished up is that I finished a training program with the International Association for the Study of Lung Cancer to be a patient research advocate. This is different from being a patient advocate in that we are trained to be the interface between research and sort of the general public and everyone else. And I thought I started this program thinking, okay, I know the science already. I got this, I got this. But I learned a lot and I met very amazing people from around the world. We had a global cohort of, I believe, 15 individuals. And we are looking forward to taking our newfound knowledge to spread the word about lung cancer research.
Thank you. And Gordon, do you want to tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Sure. It's kind of varied, but I'll focus on a few things. So just to kind of repeat what Robbie had said, the personal story is always a huge impact. So I've spoken at live and also virtual patient conferences to provide my experience with clinical trials and immunotherapy. And then I receive, questions from the patients afterwards, which is very important. But I also have spoken to the entire staff at a sequencing company, which was very well received because sequencing that I received was a kind of key element in receiving the treatment that I got. I also spoke to about 100 scientists at a pharmaceutical company, just kind of inspiring them to keep working on the next generation of treatment. And I find that those are very rewarding experiences. I'm also sitting on a consortium. It's a group of U.S. university hospitals and other centers that are trying to expand CAR T treatment into solid tumors and other types of cancer. And it's very interesting. It's funded by the U.S. Department of Defense, and they require, as part of their funding, that there be patient advocates sitting on the consortium from day one. Even though a lot of what I do at this point is just listening, fascinated with the description of the preclinical testing that they're doing right now, but ultimately, hopefully, if there are some treatments that will advance to clinical trial will be involved really in liaising with patients and families and being quite active in that process. And I would love to do that type of work in Canada as well. I don't know what opportunities there are, but it's an amazing thing for me to kind of be on that early stage of the development of the next generation of treatments. It's also it gives me some personal comfort to know that the science continues to evolve, and even the treatment I received did not exist when I was first diagnosed, and that's something I tell patients all the time: stay alive, keep. We have this motto, KFG, keep effing going, right? Stay alive, because in 6 months or a year or whenever there could be another treatment, and maybe it's not a cure, but maybe it'll buy you some more time. My oncologist talked about extending the runway. So that is very rewarding work that I've been able to do recently. I would really I find both of you, Robbie and Juan, very very amazing people. I think sometimes we stay in our silos, our cancer silos, but maybe we need some kind of cross-cancer initiative. So I'm glad that you brought us together, Sabrina, because it's sparking some ideas in my head for the future.
Well, I had other questions I wanted to ask, but then this ties in perfectly with precision medicine, because the way that it's going, it's no longer going to be you have breast cancer or you have colorectal cancer or you have lung cancer. It's you have an EGFR mutation or you have a BRAF mutation or you have a BRCA mutation. So maybe we don't have a lot of time left, but maybe we could talk about how this is going to look in, I mean, I don't think it's going to be the next 5 or 10 years, but in the future, we're not going to be talking about where your tumor is located, but rather the genomic profile of the tumor.
Yeah, I've been active in talking about how the only commonality in lung cancer is that it all started in the same organ, but really the molecular signatures in there are so different. Even with my mutation EGFR, it depending on where it mutated, your prognosis differs, your treatment plan differs. The drug that I'm on is only specific for very, very specific with specific mutations in there. Others with EGFR mutations are not so lucky. They have the more toxic treatments. And we're getting to that. And that's just your primary mutation. We're starting to have next generation sequencing reports where we talk about the tiers of mutations and what that actually means if you have combinations of mutations. Like these are the combinations of treatments that we're going to have to give you. And this is your prognosis. And because of this poor prognosis, we may need to be more aggressive about it. Or if you have a better prognosis, maybe we can scale back and manage drug toxicities and implications of drug toxicities and not give you the big, whack of it in the beginning. So we are moving in that direction in precision medicine. We're just at the tip here.
Yeah.
And we are going to start slicing into subsets of the population.
And I think it goes back to this other theme we talked about. The availability of sequencing is still very limited in Canada. When I was first diagnosed, there was no sequencing. There were some tests that they could do for certain biomarkers, but for the most part, there wasn't. When I did sequencing in 2018, the only option was to go. There were a few companies in the U.S. that did that, and even then, the profiles weren't as detailed as they are now. So a huge thing is to improve access to sequencing locally. I think in some major cancer centers, they will do it, but only for stage 4. And we're starting to see that if you have biomarkers that would make immunotherapy an option, it should be given at a lower stage cancer and avoid potentially even surgeries. I didn't mention before, I do a lot of advocacy for ostomies. I have a permanent ostomy. If you have, low level rectal cancer, even at stage 1 or 2, you're probably on a permanent ostomy. But if you've got immunotherapy, you might avoid that. So these are like life-changing implications that require the diagnostic, and sequencing is important, and we need more of that. The other side of it is the liquid biopsy, which is now routinely done in the US to monitor recurrence and to monitor efficacy of treatment. And it's I don't think it's quite widely, if at all, available locally. And that's been a real game changer in the US for sure, and we need to have that. So these are like diagnostic and other resources where it's really important. And the other point I wanted to make also is we're seeing with colon cancer, colorectal cancer, the side of the colon that the cancer appears on makes a difference. Left-sided versus right-sided colon cancer, they're now thinking are two different diseases with different prognoses. So even within cancer groups, they're starting to distinguish very specific types of biomarkers that would lead to different types of treatments. So you had made a point, Sabrina, that it's not my tumor, it's a tumor, but in a certain respect, it is my tumor because it's my DNA that did something wrong and is growing cells and not stopping, and the treatment that I need is the treatment that will work for my cancer. And I think that's the approach that needs to happen, which is our Medicare system likes to have round holes across the board and put round pegs through the round holes, but we're finding some of the pegs are square and triangle and different shapes, and I think it's almost an attitudinal change that needs to filter down, that every patient needs to be looked at individually and analyzed individually to receive the appropriate treatment.
And I'll add, like, precision oncology is so essential, and it certainly helped me. It should have been at a different point in time, and the tools were still really limited that we had access to. But and they ship everything for breast cancer for the tools that are used to California, which is like kind of wild that they rely on companies and we don't have the local ability to actually like do genome sequencing. So the first is like, totally agree it's heading in that direction, but from a health system perspective, like we don't have system readiness for these tools. So they're very ad hoc right now. And the problem also is that we have a fragmented system with kind of these different micro healthcare systems across our country, with provinces kind of running things. And then you kind of have the federal government intervening. And there's this weird like push and pull and not enough funding and allocating funding. And until you have a system to like actually holistically look at a person, it's actually really difficult because the funding buckets for pharma and for devices and for digital are separate. The mechanisms for actually approving devices and digital aren't so clear, whereas like pharma does have the pathway, but you still have the issue with cost of these immunotherapies because they often don't, they're often very expensive, and they don't look at the person as like, oh, it's going to cost, whatever, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they just don't invest that. And there's a lack of understanding of the true need. And the further layer on this is that we don't have proper data collection. So they actually don't know the true cost of a patient going through the system and the longitudinal cost of it. And we work in these like election cycles. So there's not as much of an incentive to do the economics on a person when there's these like 4-year cycles. Everyone's looking at it in the short term because that's like how their funding is, and that's how like that's their mandate. And so for like a breast cancer patient, someone who with like metastatic breast cancer who survives basically like longer than 5 years is like marked as survived, even though they're still living with cancer. And there's actually no way to truly estimate that cost right now, and there's more pushing to do that. But like, we can't get precision medicine investment until we understand the true cost and see that the likelihood is that these like earlier screening and detection tools and like proper precision oncology does lead to savings down the road. But they can't do that right now with the data that they have. So that's my little speech.
Well, that's funny because
And
that's exactly what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you from your professional experience, is our system ready for precision
No,
medicine? Yeah, absolutely
hard
not.
no. I
Yeah.
wish, and those of us that are getting it, and I still fully didn't really do it the way that you guys did. You have to advocate or you have to pay for it, and it'll take a very long time to have a system that properly implements like precision oncology and treats a patient differently. But like, we know from a knowledge translation perspective, what is it, like 17 years from like finding to action change, like that is KT. And so it is like actually the entire system. It's the way funding happens. It's the way data is collected and stored. It's the way the economics are done. It's the way that policymakers look at things. And then it's the way that oncologists and physicians also look at the patient in the care setting. So you have a lot of change that actually needs to happen to implement this properly.
And there's one other little piece too. The treatment that I received in California actually was off-label. So I technically did not fit within FDA approval, even though it made no difference to me because I didn't have insurance in the US anyways. But locally, a doctor in a cancer center hospital setting cannot prescribe off-label. They won't be covered under their liability insurance, and you don't want to be treated outside of a proper cancer center because, for example, in my case, after 18 months of treatments, I went into adrenal failure, which is a more known side effect now, but it wasn't at the time, which was almost fatal. And if I hadn't been in a comprehensive center that knew to put me on steroids right away to treat that, I could have died from the treatment. So this is also aspects of precision medicine, which is sometimes use a breast cancer drug to treat a colon cancer patient because of, there's reasons to justify it, but it's just not something our system can handle structurally.
So I realize we're a little bit over time, so I'm just going to ask one final question. And I feel like we could have just kept going. This was such a great conversation, but just going back to the comment that you made earlier, Gordon, about the need for more of us to be talking to each other and not in our cancer silos, maybe do you have any additional thoughts you want to add to that? Are there any partnerships or collaborations you feel need to start happening in this space, and not just like specific to precision medicine, but just in cancer in general in the Canadian context?
Well, what's interesting about the immunoadvocate group that I'm a part of is our common denominator is we all received immunotherapy. But other than that, we've all have different types of cancer, and we receive different types of immunotherapy as well. What we found initially, the organization brought us together to kind of advocate for the organization, to spread awareness outside, and also to help, obviously, with the fundraising. But what we found is that we were getting a lot of benefit out of the conversations we were having with each other and the brainstorming we were having with each other to improve our own networking and ability to reach out to more patients. So I think something like that would be great. It's just hard to to know under what kind of silo or what kind of organization would be there to bring us together, unless we kind of have to start to build it ourselves. Because I think that even if we come from different cancers and different treatments and different stages, a lot of the things that we're facing in the system are very similar, and also the different backgrounds. I don't have a science background, but I have an advocacy and speaking background. Other people have more knowledge of the actual science. So I think there's like synergies that could definitely be beneficial. How to make it happen? That's always the question.
Yuan?
I think it starts with us just connecting from time to time and talking about the projects that we're working on, and then we find opportunities to collaborate on a project by project basis. I mean, first off, is anyone working on a dictionary for your NGS report, for example, in the Canadian context? That could be something that we could collaborate with. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not working on it. But I think the more we talk to each other and the more we understand the commonalities, the more little projects we can start working on. And from there, we built something bigger.
And Robbie?
I mean, like these conversations are always like so helpful, right? Because it's I mean, the inspiring word always bugs me, but it is inspiring because I think we can call each other inspiring, but I don't love the other word. Sometimes it feels not authentic. But it is inspiring to hear the work that we're all doing and pushing and that commonality, and the work that I do as an advocate with Canadian Cancer Society is not cancer specific. It's across all types of cancer and issues that face all Canadians as well. And it's important because it is one cancer system. If you look at like each individual province, like you have one cancer agency that's setting those policies and setting those screening things, and it affects all of us for sure. So I thought this was a great conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like you, Gordon, that I like the little mouse in my head, the wheel is spinning, and I'm thinking about how do I get all of you and some other people in the room and have a conversation and, build out this type of collaboration or project that needs to happen. But I appreciate all of you so much. And I think if anybody is listening, they for sure understood why I asked the three of you to come on and be on the podcast today, because you're all amazing. And I really wish we had more time, but I'm going to leave it there. So for everybody who is listening, thank you so much for being with us. And KFG.